In the previous lesson, we discussed the printing of the Tanya, and how after the Tanya was printed, the committee of Misnagdim that were involved in fighting Hasidic movements launched an aggressive campaign to do everything they possibly can to destroy the Hasidic movement, and specifically they aimed at the Alter Rebbe himself. A year later, after the passing of the Vilna Gaon, they intensified their activities in an even more aggressive way. However, the committee realized that they can no longer use the tactics that they used in the previous years. In the previous years, the way they tried to discredit the Hasidic movement was by painting a picture that Hasidim are not God-fearing Jews, they're not religious Jews, they violate Torah and mitzvahs. Chas v'shalom. And they painted a picture of Hasidim are God forbid followers and a continuation of the Shafti Tzvi movement. He was a person who lived about 100 years before the Alter Rebbe, and he was involved with the study of Kabbalah, and he himself violated Torah mitzvahs. He misled other Jews to violate Torah mitzvahs, and eventually he went as far as converting Rahman al-Islam to Islam. And at that point, most of the people realized that he was an impostor, but there were still some Jews who followed him even to go that far and convert Rahman al-Islam to another religion. So initially, this is the impression they tried to make, that Chassidim are a continuation of that group, Ahavdim. But at this point, there were already tens of thousands of Chassidim spread out all through over Russia and Lithuania. Even the Misnagdim recognized that the Chassidim were God-fearing Jews, Jews who studied Torah and were great Torah scholars, who observed mitzvahs, Behida, in the highest order, Jews who had Midas Tevis and gave a lot of tzedakah, and there's no way that all these rumors and all these false accusations that were used years before could be used now again. So once they realized that, they had to take another route in how to discredit the Chassidim. And unfortunately, they turned to something very low. And that is, they decided to inform against the Alter Rebbe, to give a mitzvah to the non-Jewish government, to the Tsar's government, against the Alter Rebbe. And their hope was that this mitzvah will be so severe that they would, God forbid, execute the Alter Rebbe, and then, without the Alter Rebbe leading the Chassidic movement, the whole Chassidic movement would fall apart. This was their plan. Unfortunately, they succeeded in bringing their reports to the government, and the government accepting it. What did they do? There were actually a number of things that they wrote in their report, but one of the main things were that they wrote that the Alter Rebbe is sending money to Eretz Yisrael. That time it was under the Turkish Empire, and he's sending this money to reinforce the Turkish army, and that would be used eventually to overthrow the Tsar's army. What was this all about? As we mentioned in the previous lessons, that in the year Tovkuf Lamed Zayin, 1777, Rav Mendel Haradoker, Rebbe Ram Kaliska, and other Hasidic Rebbes and their Hasidim and families moved to Eretz Yisrael. They could no longer tolerate and take this persecution that was coming from the Misnagdim, and decided to move and live in Eretz Yisrael. Even the Alter Rebbe initially thought of joining them, but eventually he decided that he will stay in Russia and he will continue to spread Chassidus, the Mesiras Nefesh. Under the most difficult circumstances, nothing will stop him. In the year Tovkuf Memches, a little bit more than 10 years later, the Alter Rebbe established a special fund called the Meir Bar Hanes Kel Chabad, a tzedakah fund. And this tzedakah fund was exclusively to support the families who lived in Eretz Yisrael. And for this purpose, Alter Rebbe appointed special shluchim, special messengers, that they traveled from city to city amongst the Lubavitcher Chassidim, and they collected money for this tzedakah fund, and then they would also travel to Eretz Yisrael to bring the money to those families. In fact, there are many letters that Alter Rebbe wrote encouraging the Chassidim to give money to this tzedakah fund, and most of the letters that we find in Tanya, in the 4th volume of Tanya, which is called the Geras HaKodesh, talk about the importance of giving tzedakah, and they pertain to this particular tzedakah, the tzedakah for the families in Eretz Yisrael. And in fact, we find that in every generation, the Rebbe of Chabad continued the tradition of the Alter Rebbe, and they were personally involved with, and personally they oversaw this tzedakah fund, that the money should go to support families in Eretz Yisrael. And this is the way it was by the Mittel Rebbe, by the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe Rashab, the previous Rebbe, and also by our Rebbe, a special invested interest in this particular fund. And the custom is that women and young girls, before they light the candle, Shabbos and Yontif, they put money specifically in this tzedakah box, Kel Chabad. So the Misnagdim took advantage of this, and in the report they wrote, Alter Rebbe is sending money to Israel to support the Turkish army, and the purpose is to send that army which will eventually overthrow the Tsar's army. That's one thing that they focused on. Another thing they focused on was to discredit the Alter Rebbe within the Jewish community, that the Jewish community rejects what he does, and that his ways are against the Torah and against mitzvahs and against Judaism, Rahman al-Islam. And then a third point was where they took the Alter Rebbe's writings and Chassidus and the teachings of Chassidus, and they twisted it and distorted it and showed the government the Alter Rebbe is teaching his followers that they should be against the government. Where did they find this in Chassidus? As you know, Chassidus talks about the spiritual attributes, the 10 spheres. The 10 spheres are Chochmah, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gevura, Teferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus. And of course, Alter Rebbe explains these 10 spheres as it is found in Kabbalah. It's found in the teachings of mysticism, it's found in the Zohar, and Alter Rebbe talks about the attribute of Malchus, royalty, kingdom. That is the 10th of the 10 attributes, and it's the lowest of the 10 attributes. So they twisted this to mean that Alter Rebbe is putting down and degrading the government and the kingdom, because he writes that Malchus is the lowest of the 10 attributes. One of the points that it brought out in Chassidus, based on what it says in Kabbalah, is about Malchus, that Lesto Megarmot Klum. That the attribute of Malchus, the sphere of Malchus, is a sphere that it has nothing of its own. It receives everything from the other 9 spheres. So he said here is again where the Alter Rebbe degrades kingdom and royalty and says it has nothing of its own. Literally, totally distorting the meaning of the teachings of Chassidus and twisting it to mean that the Rebbe was aiming it at the Russian government, and he was teaching his followers to put down royalty and put down kingdom. The actual arrest took place on Isru Chag, the day after Sukkot, but the Chassidim said that already from Rosh Hashanah, a few weeks before it actually happened, even though they weren't aware, they didn't know yet what was going on, but they felt from the Alter Rebbe, from the Alter Rebbe's davening, from the Maimorim of Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe said that something was going on. They sensed that there was something very frightening going on. For example, it said in the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, and the teachings of Chassidus that he gave over during Yontif and the way he davened, they felt a very deep bitterness in the Alter Rebbe's davening, which frightened them. It made them sense that the Alter Rebbe sees a certain danger coming. Even on Simchas Torah, which is a time of joy, the Chassidus and the teachings, the way the Alter Rebbe explained the pasuk Ata Reis Avodas, he explained it in a way that it meant, the Alter Rebbe interpreted it to mean that a person sometimes has to break himself in order to recognize and to bring out into the world that Hashem is one. And many other things which all pointed in the same direction that something, there's a big tzara, God forbid, coming. Tzemach Tzedek said he was the grandson of the Alter Rebbe, the third Rebbe of Chabad. He was an orphan, and he lost his mother at age 3, who was the Rebbetzin Dvar Aleya, as he told the story in a previous lesson. So when he was a young child, the Alter Rebbe was personally responsible for his upbringing. He took it upon himself. And the Alter Rebbe would take the Tzemach Tzedek under his talus. And this was on Rosh Hashanah, during Tkiyah Shofar, during the blowing of Shofar, and also during the Duchening, when the Kohanim would give their blessing. For Duchening, he took him under his talus until he was married. And for Tkiyah Shofar, he took him under his talus until age 9. So that year, when he was under the Alter Rebbe's talus, Tzemach Tzedek was not even 9 years old yet. Tzemach Tzedek said he sensed that there's a tzara coming this year, and he didn't even see the Yeshua. He didn't see the salvation. The previous Rebbe pointed out, what does it mean he didn't see the salvation? The Alter Rebbe was freed from jail, eventually. But it means because the freedom from jail wasn't complete. As we know, after that, the Alter Rebbe was arrested a second time, and a few years later, the Mittul Rebbe was arrested. That's what the Tzemach Tzedek meant when he said that he didn't see the salvation. And we also see another interesting thing here. Here, the Tzemach Tzedek was less than 9 years old, and he was able to see what's going on a higher spiritual plane, and he saw what was coming up in terms of the Alter Rebbe's arrest. Initially, they came to arrest the Alter Rebbe during Chalamoid Sukkot. Chalamoid Sukkot, the general came, and he with an entourage, they were a group of armed soldiers, and they had come to arrest the Alter Rebbe. When the Alter Rebbe heard about this, he slipped away through the back door. He left the house. The Alter Rebbe said he did this because there's a pasuk where it says, Chavi Rega, Ma'at Rega Ad Yavar Zam, which means wait a moment until the wrath will pass. In other words, sometimes by waiting, the wrath and the anger of Hashem will pass, and the negative thing that's supposed to happen won't happen. The Alter Rebbe also wanted to think over with himself whether or not he should allow himself to get arrested. In fact, the Alter Rebbe consulted with one of the Chassidim, whose name was Shmuel Munkes. This Shmuel Munkes was a Chassid that on the surface, he appeared to be a Chassid with a good sense of humor, a Chassid who was up to mischief from time to time, but in truth, he was really a very great Chassid, and his greatness was exceptional. I mean, there's a story told about him, just to give an example of where he appeared to be just mischievous and a man of sense of humor, but really was a great Chassid. Where one time, a group of Chassidim sat down to have a Chassidische Verbrengen, where they sit down with l'chaim, something to eat, they sing Nigunim, somebody speaks, and at this Chassidische Verbrengen, the Shmuel Munkes was present. What they had for eating was meat. So they had the l'chaim, the whiskey, and they had some meat. The Shmuel Munkes was the one who was supposed to distribute the l'chaim. He took the meat, and he said that this he's not giving to anyone. And one of the people that was sitting there, one of the students said, why not? And he said, no, this you can't have. And the person got up to take it away from him, so he walked away from the table. So that person started to walk after him, and he began to run away. That person began to chase him. So if Shmuel is seeing that the person will catch up to him and take away the meat, he took the meat, threw it into the toilet, and now no one could have it. And of course everybody was very upset at him. How dare he just take meat and waste it for absolutely no reason at all. After a short period of time passed, suddenly they heard a woman shouting and really crying at the same time. And she was begging for forgiveness. Who was this woman? She was the wife of the butcher. And when they came to her house to ask for meat, by mistake she shouted and cried, I gave you the wrong piece of meat. I gave you a piece of meat which was actually treif. And of course they calmed her down, and they were able to tell her that nothing came out of it because no one ate the meat. The Shmuel Munkes in fact threw the meat away. But when this happened, the Chassidim looked at the Shmuel Munkes now with a new sense of respect, that he was able to detect that this meat is not kosher. So it appears to be that he's some sort of a tzaddik. So the Shmuel Munkes said, no, I'm not a prophet, I'm not the son of a prophet. I'll tell you how I knew that there's something wrong with the meat. The Alter Rebbe has a phrase, a Hasidic phrase. In Yiddish, the Alter Rebbe would say this with a tune. Das, was man torn nicht, tormen doch nicht. Und das, was man mag, darf man nicht. Which means that which is not permissible goes without questions, without saying that this is not permissible. But even that which is permitted to do, you don't have to do. And he said that one of the most basic principles of Chassidus in the Aleph days, like the first step to becoming a Chassid and serving Hashem as a Chassid, was to master this principle. That even things that you're permitted to do, you don't have to do. A concept which is very famous in Chassidus by the word iskatya, which means to be able to contain yourself and discipline yourself, not to give in to your impulses. So Shmuel Munkes says that when we became Chassidim, the first thing we mastered was this, to know that even if we have an impulse for something, we're able to discipline ourselves and contain ourselves. In this case, I found, and I saw, looking at everybody who wanted the meat, that this meat had some sort of a very powerful power of attraction. Everybody was very attracted to the meat and wanted it very much. And that's something very unusual. So I sense it must be because the meat is probably not kosher, and it says in Chassidus that something which comes from klipa, something which is totally not kosher, has a very strong power of attraction. And that's how I knew that it's not really kosher. There's a story with him that he and a group of Chassidim once walked by the Alter Rebbe's house, and he jumped up to the windowsill of the Alter Rebbe's house, and he was hanging from the windowsill. Looked quite strange, and the other Chassidim asked him, what in the world are you doing? What does this mean? So he said, when you walk by a shoe store, there are shoes hanging. So everybody should know this is a place where they sell shoes. When you walk by a clothing store, there are clothing hanging. So everybody knows this is where you can buy clothing. When you walk by the Alter Rebbe's house, a Rebbe is one who inspires Chassidim. So there should be a chassid hanging. So here was a person who had a sense of humor and did different mischievous kind of things, but in truth he was really a very great chassid. And he was the one that Alter Rebbe consulted and asked him, what does he think? Alter Rebbe said to him, what do you think? Should I surrender myself, allow myself to get arrested, or not? And the answer Shmuel Munkes gave to him was also a very deep answer. He said to him, Alter Rebbe asked him, isn't it a danger to put myself into this situation? So he said to the Alter Rebbe, if you are truly a Rebbe, then this danger will not harm you. And if you're not, Chas v'shalom, then where did you have the right to take away the thrill and pleasure of the physical, materialistic world from so many Jews? Now the point he was making was that the Alter Rebbe, being that he is a Rebbe and he's a tzaddik, Therefore, he's not bound to the laws of nature, and ultimately, no one will be able to harm him. But the way he phrased it, the way he articulated this, was in the following way: that if you're not a Rebbe, Chas v'Shalom, then how did you have the right to take away this thrill and pleasure from the physical, materialistic world for so many thousands of Jews? When a person learns Chassidus, that's when they recognize that godliness is really everything. And that's the true essence of everything. And nothing in the world really has any real, true meaning, and doesn't have any true life and true existence compared to the godliness in it. And therefore, even people that are not on a very high level, ordinary people, and therefore they learn Torah, they do mitzvahs, but they still derive pleasure from physical, materialistic things. But once a person learns Chassidus, that pleasure and that thrill is no longer the same, because you realize that this is really not it. There's something deeper to life than the physical, materialistic pleasures. And this is just another example of how he found some sort of a humorous way in presenting things and phrasing things. But at the same time, he was really a very great chassid, and every word that he said really had tremendous depth to it. After the Alter Rebbe thought things over and consulted with those who he wanted to consult with, Alter Rebbe gave over his decision to those that were close to him, and he said that he made up his mind that he's accepting upon himself to go through with everything, and it'll all be for the good. In the meantime, this general who came to arrest the Alter Rebbe, seeing that the Alter Rebbe left the house, and seeing that there's a holiday atmosphere, he didn't want to disturb the holiday atmosphere, he himself left the city, and he put someone else in charge while he was away. Naturally, the days of Chalamoid Sukkot and Shemini Atzeres and Simchas Torah were very difficult ones for the Chassidim, and they were full of dread of what's going to happen. And by this time, the news spread to other cities outside of Lozhna that Chalamoid, the general, had come to arrest the Alter Rebbe. On Isur Chag, the day right after Yontif, in the morning, the Alter Rebbe, who, as we said before, was a phenomenal organizer and coordinator, prepared the Chassidim for the time of his arrest and already organized them what they should do. He wrote a letter, a general letter to all the Chassidim, and first of all in this letter the Alter Rebbe cautions the Chassidim that they should be strong in their bitochen, in their trust in Hashem, that everything will come out okay. And the Alter Rebbe writes that if anything has to happen, anyone has to suffer, he accepts this upon himself. The Alter Rebbe also writes in this letter that now he understands the hint that he got from his Rebbe, from Mezritcher Maggid, many years ago. Mezritcher Maggid told him there's going to come a time where he will have to suffer, and very difficult times will pass. And obviously what's happening now, these are the times that the Mezritcher Maggid foresaw. Alter Rebbe also warned the Chassidim that under no circumstances should they retaliate and do anything bad to the Misnagdim, but they should continue to act in a normal way towards the Misnagdim, in spite of what the Misnagdim did. Alter Rebbe also charged the older Chassidim with the responsibility that they should look after the younger Chassidim, and the Alter Rebbe cautioned the younger Chassidim that they should follow the orders and the guidance of the older Chassidim. They quickly made hundreds of copies of this letter, and the special messengers that were sent out to all the Chassidic Chabad in all the cities near Lozhna and far away. Later during the day, closer to the night, was actually at night already, the night of Isur Chag, they came a second time to arrest the Alter Rebbe. They came with what they called in those days the Schwarze Beidel, which means a black wagon. And it was known that this black wagon was not just for a person who was being arrested, but someone was being arrested for treason or some sort of rebellious act against the king, which that in itself indicated that the Mesira, what the Misnagdim informed, must have been very, very severe. So they ordered the Alter Rebbe to go into that wagon while they were armed soldiers, armed policemen, watching the Alter Rebbe, and they were taking the Alter Rebbe to the city of Peterburg, which was the capital where the Tsar himself was. Before the Alter Rebbe had left, his brother-in-law, Rebbe Saul Kozik, asked the Alter Rebbe, "What should I do?" So Alter Rebbe said to him, "Go right away, but immediately to Peterburg. And another person should go immediately to Barditchev and give a pidyon nefesh to Rebbe Yitzchak, to ask Rebbe Yitzchak for a bracha for the Alter Rebbe." So the Alter Rebbe's brother-in-law, Rabbi Yisrael, followed the Alter Rebbe's orders, and he went immediately to Peterburg. And being the Alter Rebbe told him immediately, he wore the exact same clothes. He was wearing, at that time, very strange clothing, for whatever reason. And also, he had no time to go home to get his passport, because Alter Rebbe said, "Go immediately." So he borrowed someone else's passport, and he went to the city of Peterburg. Another chassid, he went to the city of Barditchev to go to Rebbe Yitzchak Barditchev for his bracha. And the next lesson will continue as what happened when it came to Rebbe Yitzchak. Before we finish this lesson, just one more point to mention that when the Alter Rebbe had left with the soldiers in the black wagon, the later found on the Alter Rebbe's desk a piece of paper which was written, something was written on it, B'ksav Yad Kosher, the Alter Rebbe's handwriting, and the words were from Tehillim, Sorim L'dafuni Chinam U'midvorcho Pochad Libi, which means, ministers pursue me in vain, and from your words my heart has fear. And that the Fabrengen, that everyone wants to explain this to mean that a Yid has nothing to fear because he's not really bound to the laws of nature as long as he does the will of Hashem. That's the only thing that he has to fear. And in the next lesson, we'll continue the story of the Alter Rebbe's arrest.